Less than a week after a single remark shook the foundations of NATO, the global order is visibly shifting. Not with missiles, not with marches, but with signatures and silence. On January 27, 2026, the European Union and India signed a trade agreement 2 decades in the making. But it wasn't the timing that surprised diplomats, it was the message. This was not just a trade deal. It was a reconfiguration, a deliberate redrawing of the world's economic architecture without the United States. At the center of this pivot, a sentence. 16 words. Spoken live on television by the President of the United States. In a routine interview on Fox Business, President Trump claimed that during the war in Afghanistan, NATO allies stayed a little back, a little off the front lines. While American troops did the fighting, the diplomatic fallout was instant and historic. For the first time in decades, a British Prime Minister publicly rebuked a sitting US president. German officials called the statement false and disrespectful to the fallen. From Ottawa to Berlin, allies weren't just offended. They were activated. This was not just another Trump controversy. This was a fracture. Raw, public, and measurable. The NATO alliance, long reliant on mutual respect and shared sacrifice, suddenly found its core assumption questioned. Would America still stand beside its allies? Or had the world's most powerful nation just walked off the battlefield rhetorically and strategically? The answer came not through speeches, but through actions. As Washington ramped up tariffs and threats, Europe and India accelerated something far more permanent, a new axis of cooperation that bypasses the Atlantic entirely. And now the question is no longer, is America leading? It's, who is building the future? The backlash didn't unfold in whispers. It exploded across continents. Just hours after President Trump's comment aired, Downing Street issued an unprecedented statement. Prime Minister Keir Starmer called the remarks appalling and insulting, a rare breach of diplomatic restraint between allied leaders. Across the Channel, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius took to national television. With visible anger, he said, "It is not true, and it is deeply disrespectful to the fallen." And the numbers back them up. The United Kingdom lost 457 troops in Afghanistan. Canada, 158. Germany, 59. Denmark, per capita, suffered some of the heaviest casualties in the coalition. These weren't logistics officers sitting behind safe walls. They were boots in Helmand, rifles in Kandahar. They fought. They bled. They died alongside American forces. To dismiss their role wasn't just historically false. It was diplomatically explosive. Because NATO isn't just a military pact. It's a trust contract. And Article 5, the heart of that contract, only holds when members believe that sacrifice is remembered, not rewritten. In Brussels, conversations shifted quickly. What started as outrage became contingency. If this level of disrespect could be voiced so casually, what else could be undone just as easily? The assumption that the United States would always stand by its allies economically, militarily, morally was no longer treated as a certainty. It became a variable, a risk. For some, the president's words were a political gaffe. For others, they were a signal. A declaration of disengagement disguised as a soundbite. And so the gears began to turn. Policy memos replaced press releases. Quiet calls replaced public statements. And beneath the surface, old debates gained new urgency. Could Europe defend itself without the U.S.? Should it? Would it need to? In capitals across Europe, the conversation was no longer, what did he mean? But what if he meant exactly what he said? The diplomatic rupture didn't lead to immediate retaliation. It triggered something more calculated: acceleration. For years, the European Union and India had danced around a free trade agreement. Talks would begin with fanfare, stall in technicalities, and retreat into silence. It had become a diplomatic tradition, ambitious in scope, impossible in practice. Until now, in the days following Trump's comments, the pace shifted dramatically. Brussels didn't issue more condemnations. It called New Delhi. What had once been a marathon turned into a sprint. Trade negotiators who had spent years untangling disagreements were now empowered to move decisively. Why? Because the geopolitical equation had changed. The threat was no longer just economic uncertainty. It was strategic abandonment. The message from Washington was clear, even if it wasn't official. Europe could no longer assume US alignment or even US attention. So Brussels turned east. And India was already waiting. For New Delhi, the opportunity was golden. Facing American tariffs of up to 40% on textiles, leather, and manufactured goods, India had been seeking new trade corridors. Europe offered a market of 450 million high-income consumers. More importantly, it offered stability, predictability, respect. The negotiations, once bogged down in bureaucracy, became sharply transactional. The EU demanded tariff reductions on vehicles, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, and agricultural machinery, all sectors hit by Trump-era trade walls. India agreed. In return, India secured tariff-free access for 99% of its exports to Europe. From cotton saris to precision-cut diamonds, Indian goods would now flow across the continent unimpeded. But this wasn't just a trade deal. It was a trust deal. Both sides recognized the unspoken truth. Alliances based on reliability had to be built elsewhere. If Washington wouldn't lead by partnership, others would lead by coordination. The ink dried on January 27th, but the shift had begun long before. That triggered not by policy, but by posture. Not by war, but by words. This was the moment when diplomacy stopped waiting, and strategy caught up with reality. On paper, it's a trade deal. In practice, it's a geopolitical reorientation. The EU-India Free Trade Agreement, signed on January 27, 2026, isn't just the largest bilateral trade pact either side has ever concluded. It's a map of future alignment. Behind the tariff schedules and product categories lies a quiet message. The global economy no longer turns on an American axis. The numbers are staggering. The agreement eliminates tariffs on 96% of EU exports entering India. That includes automobiles, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, industrial machinery, and green technologies. For decades, selling a European car in India meant confronting a 110% import tax. Under this deal, that duty drops to 10%. A German-made BMW, once out of reach for most Indian buyers, is now competitively priced. For Germany's export-reliant auto sector, this isn't just a win, it's a lifeline. But the benefits aren't one-sided. In return, 99% of Indian exports will enter Europe duty-free. That includes textiles, spices, jewelry, processed food, leather goods sectors that employ millions in India's informal economy. For Indian manufacturers struggling under US tariffs, this deal isn't just about market access. It's about survival, and the timing is no accident. Just as the U.S. imposed sweeping new tariffs on both European and Indian goods. 25% on steel, 15% on automobiles, 40% on textiles. Brussels and New Delhi swung open the doors for each other. It's a classic pivot. When one partner raises walls, the other builds bridges. Beyond trade, the agreement includes unprecedented cooperation clauses, joint research in green energy, digital governance frameworks, shared cybersecurity protocols, and coordinated maritime security in the Indo-Pacific. These are policy areas that, until recently, would have been handled with Washington at the table. Now, they are being negotiated without it. This isn't just diversification. It's a hedge, a recalibration of risk. The EU-India corridor isn't designed to exclude the United States. But it no longer waits for it either. In the quiet clauses of this 1,200-page agreement lies the loudest geopolitical signal of the decade. The age of automatic American inclusion is over. Trade is not just policy, it's positioning. And right now, the United States is losing ground. Since the EU-India deal was finalized, trade volumes between the two regions have surged by more than 26%. Meanwhile, U.S. exports to both markets are in decline. Shipments to India have dropped 17% since the first wave of tariffs in early 2025. Exports to the EU are down 14%. And the reason is not political, it's practical. This is trade diversion in real time. Imagine you're a wheat buyer in Mumbai. A French farmer can now offer you grain without a single euro in border tax. An American farmer? Still facing a 20% tariff. Who gets the deal? The same applies to machinery, pharmaceuticals, wine, and luxury goods. The EU has effectively secured a first-mover advantage in the Indian market, one of the most rapidly expanding middle-class populations in the world. And the U.S. watching from the sidelines. This isn't theory. It's infrastructure. Once the new trade flows are established, new contracts signed, new logistics networks built, they don't disappear overnight. They become habits. They become the new normal. And for American businesses, this is more than lost sales. It's lost relevance. The administration's response has been to double down. The Great Rebuilding, as President Trump calls it, is a push to repatriate manufacturing through tariffs and domestic investment. In July 2025, he touted a $550 billion investment pledge from Japanese firms as proof of concept. But the reality is more sobering. None of that money has arrived. Japanese executives cite instability and unpredictability as the primary reasons for delay. Investors don't fear taxes. They fear chaos. Meanwhile, consumers at home are paying the price. Tariffs have driven up costs across key sectors: electronics, automobiles, household goods, further fueling inflation. And the working class base these policies were meant to protect? They are spending more, getting less, and losing export access to the very markets they once dominated. The numbers tell the story. The U.S. is isolating itself economically at the exact moment its competitors are expanding access. And markets have no patience for nostalgia. They reward access. They punish absence. In a global economy, the cost of isolation isn't just higher prices. It's irrelevance. You won't find it in a treaty. There's no formal declaration. But behind closed doors, it's already underway. The soft ban. This is what happens when allies stop trusting you, not publicly, but structurally. Not with exits, but with exits unannounced. Since Trump's comments on Afghanistan, signs of informal exclusion have multiplied. Intelligence briefings that once flowed seamlessly between Washington and its European partners are now delayed or withheld. Joint military exercises are quietly scaled back. G7 summits begin before the American delegation arrives. The decisions are made in hallways, not plenary sessions. And perhaps nowhere is this shift more visible than in the Arctic. What began as a headline oddity, President Trump reviving his 2019 proposal to purchase Greenland, has turned into a regional crisis. When Denmark rejected the idea again in early 2026, Trump responded with threats: tariffs on Danish exports, a review of bilateral security cooperation, and accusations of strategic hoarding. The implications were serious. The Arctic isn't just ice and polar bears, it's shipping lanes, rare earth metals, and future geopolitical leverage. Denmark holds the keys. But the approach from Washington, it pushed Nordic allies away. Sweden expedited its defense integration with the EU. Norway launched joint naval drills with France and Germany without American involvement. Finland reportedly ceased routine intelligence sharing with US agencies. This isn't defiance. It's insurance. Because if allies can't predict Washington's next move, they start building shelters of their own. And once alternative alliances are operational, they don't revert easily. Trust, once broken, doesn't reschedule. The soft ban isn't an event. It's a process. And it's accelerating. The tools of the ban are not missiles or sanctions. They're silence, omission, meetings that no longer include you, documents shared with others first, strategic coordination in which your name is not mentioned, not because you're the enemy, but because you're no longer essential. And the most dangerous part? You might not notice until it's already done. Let's be clear. This isn't an anti-American narrative. It's not even about Donald Trump alone. It's about alignment and the shifting ground beneath it. Yes, the president's remarks were inflammatory. Yes, the tariffs escalated tensions. But the deeper story here, the more important one, is structural. It's about what happens when allies begin planning around you instead of with you. This is not the collapse of NATO. It's the recalibration of trust. Europe didn't walk away because of a single insult. India didn't pivot because of a single tariff. These moves were the result of accumulated unpredictability, policy by shockwave, diplomacy by headline, strategy by improvisation. And when predictability vanishes, partnership becomes risk. That's when countries start building parallel systems. But does that mean the United States is finished as a global leader? No. It means leadership is no longer automatic. In today's world, leadership is not just about military strength or economic scale. It's about credibility, consistency, the quiet confidence that comes from being counted on even when the cameras are off. America can still lead. But it must choose to re-engage, rebuild trust, and not through deals alone but through reliability. Because the alternative isn't war. It's something quieter, harder to detect, but just as consequential. It's being left out. Disclaimer: this video is based on verified diplomatic events, publicly available trade data, and political statements as of January 2026. It does not endorse any political figure, party, or country. Its aim is to inform, not inflame. Interpretations may vary, but the facts speak for themselves. Now, the final question. If your closest allies are not calling you an adversary but they've stopped calling altogether, what does that make you? A partner? Or a memory?